Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. We're delighted to welcome Barry McLaughlin of the Communications Clinic, and we're delighted to host this session for you today in support of the Limerick Chamber Regional Business Awards, but also for your businesses going forward. We hope this is a tool that you'll be able to implement. We are recording today's session, so we will be able to share a link with you following the session today. It will be in the next couple of days. It'll also be featured on our website there for you. The session today is in honour of the fact that we've launched our Limerick Chamber Regional Business Awards, and applications are available via our website. If anyone does have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. You'll have my email and you'll also have the chat feature there as well for any questions you may have throughout the session. And there's also the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screens. So we do encourage you to just pop in a little hello there, or if you do have any questions for Barry throughout the session, make sure to pop them in there. So I'll hand you over to the very capable hands of our lovely Barry here for our speaker today. Thank you very much, Barry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caoimhe. Thank you very much for that very, very kind introduction. And first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking to you today. I'm actually sitting in an office here in Dublin. I'm only sorry I'm not down there virtually. As I've mentioned to Dee Ryan and a couple of people in Limerick Chamber, I've strong connections with Limerick. I lived down there for a number of years, went down to college there as well. So hopefully this time next year we'll be all able to do this in a very nice room overlooking the Shannon, as opposed to looking at each other on a screen. But guys, absolutely delighted to work with you today. And really, the key thing I want to maybe just emphasize at the beginning of this session is that this is going to be as interactive as possible. I'm happy to take any questions any time. And in fact, in a minute, I'm just going to quickly get a sense if anyone has any particular issue that they want to make sure we cover today. But I want to emphasize this to you all. The principles, the examples, the structures we give you today are not just for next week's competition, and indeed for anything that you do within Limerick Chamber. These are fundamental rules of communication. These are fundamental techniques that will make you more engaging and more memorable to your customers, your clients, your stakeholders, your colleagues, your staff. So we're going to look at the ways and means by which people actually pay attention, listen, communicate, on all these kind of things as well. So if you have a question at any time, pop it in the chat box as well. There's absolutely no problem. And I'm quite happy to take questions at any time. And I suppose moving on to that point, the first thing I want to ask people is, if they have any questions, what are your own learning objectives for today? Is there anything that people want to pop in the chat box that say, yeah, the next 45 minutes or whatever, here's a thing I'd like to get out of today in terms of my application, the interview, how do I communicate that bit more effectively or that bit more empathetically? So if you have anything that you want to put in the chat, any particular area you want to cover, it could be something like nerves, it could be how do you practice, how do you structure it. Very happy to do that. So I'll give you a minute there, guys, if you just want to maybe think about what is it you'd like to get out of the session, what are your own learning objectives for today, and I'd be very happy to make a note of them, and we make sure that we deal with them as they go along. And if you can't think of something in the next minute or two, that's fine. Pop it in the chat box, and we're very happy to look at it and cover it as well. So remember, it could be a number of things. It could be, how do you structure a communication? How do you manage your own nerves? What's the best way to practice? What is storytelling, or how do you tell a story? Or maybe how do you deal with difficult questions or areas that you're not comfortable in? So, feel free to pop it in, because the question you ask is very likely to be a question other people have asked as well. And even if we don't get any questions, I'll certainly keep dipping in with you as we go through the next 45 minutes or so. Okay, so we'll just give it one more minute, and if there aren't any questions, we'll just move on and we'll start looking at some of the principles that we need to consider around storytelling, around communication, and how to be that bit more effective. Okay.
just drop in there, Barry. I suppose for the session today, what I would love for this session to kind of present would be for all of us, storytelling is such an important part of our tendering, but also our communications on socials, but especially for our judges and the applicants. Kind of trying to get an understanding of your journey, your culture, and your brand, and who the essence of your company is. And that's very hard to put an onus on someone to do that. So that's what we're hoping for this session today to present. I know I'm certainly sitting here with my cup of coffee, contemplating life right now, but I just pop in and say from a chamber perspective, that's what
absolutely. And we will absolutely look at that today. And I think one of the key things, and it's a good point, Caoimhe, is that there's a lot of words that we've used: your journey, your culture, your brand. And the problem is that they're quite conceptual things. How do you get across your journey or your brand or your culture in a short conversation or communication? We're going to show you, like a lot of things in life, it's about thinking and planning, practicing and executing. And we're going to show you how to do that now. So normally the way we run these sessions is that we would normally randomly pick on someone and ask them to come on screen and tell us a bit about their company, their brand, their culture, their journey, etc. Now, I'm not going to do that to you today, guys. So instead, what we've done is we have a communication, a couple of communications we want you to look at. It gives a sense of, what do you think? Did they get across what they want to get across? Does it come across the way you would like it to understand it? And we'll take the good things and make sure we keep doing them. And there's something we need to fix. How do we do it? Well, the first thing I want to look at is in terms of the whole area of storytelling. Well, why are stories so important? I mean, what is, we've heard a lot about storytelling recently, and storytelling is important because it's one of the most fundamental forms of communication. And if you look at it from a cultural point of view, and if you look at it, whether you're Irish, whether you're English, whether you're religious, not religious, whatever, you cannot but have been influenced by stories in your life. If you look at the way, for example, our history is taught, we're all told a story of Cuchulainn. We're told stories about various Irish heroes. Other cultures do exactly the same thing. And in fact, if you look at cultures throughout the world, and I suppose we've been influenced by, what has gone on in Norse culture and all that, they all have similar themes, but they're all expressed and built around stories. So we tell stories to our kids. We tell stories because we want people to understand the values. So, you could look at, for example, the Bible, the parables. There's an example of storytelling, or indeed the 10 Commandments. So culturally, it's a very easy way to connect with people by telling a story. There's a second reason as well. There's a physiological significance that a well-told story fires up our brain. We can almost, if someone tells you a really good story, you can almost put yourself in that position, and your brain is starting to work and create pictures in your head and memories. And the reason that that's important is that you are more likely to transmit a story that has been well told to somebody else. So if you're in the business of selling your brand or your service, if you can describe it in a way to a judge, to a colleague, to a client, in a way that kind of fires up their imagination, you're much more likely to be remembered and to be faithfully have that story passed on and told. And that's something we want as well. And the third thing is that stories are memorable. And it's interesting that we can often think of a story we mightn't have heard for years if it's told right the first time. So the fact that something we want people to remember us, we want the judges to remember us for the right reasons. We want our clients to remember us for the right reasons. We want them to remember if they hear about someone in a, oh, I went to whoever, they were very good. So we want to make our stories as memorable as possible. So can we do that? Can that be planned? Can that be achieved? Absolutely. Of course it can. But before we start to look at the structure around it, let's just look at one or two examples of what fundamental communication is about. when people come into us in the communications clinic, whether it's to help with a media interview or a presentation or a speech or a job interview or whatever it is, they come in often focused on themselves. Go, I've got this wedding, or I've got to do this interview. This thing has gone wrong. We have to go out in the media or whatever. I'm worried about what I'm going to say. I'm worried about how people are going to think of my message or my brand. Now, that's a perfectly natural human reaction. But actually, if you really want to be a good communicator, you have to take a big step back and look at it coolly and objectively. This is a simple way to kind of get yourself thinking about your communication in an objective, dispassionate, but more effective manner. The first thing you have to do is, who is your audience? So before you open your mouth, what are your audience thinking, feeling, doing, knowing, saying right now about you, your product, or your service? Now, thankfully, you're in a very good position because you know who your judges are. So if you look at your list of judges, they range from people who have won this competition in the past, people who have run chambers, people who've run big companies, people who are financially astute. So you can actually really sit down and go, well, hang on now, if I could put myself in the mindset of my audience, forget about what I want to say. What are these people thinking, feeling, doing, and knowing, saying right now? Chances are, as judges, they're looking at your application form. They're thinking, right, can this person prove the things that they claim? What evidence do they have? How will they answer questions? What specific examples are they going to give us to demonstrate the various criteria under each award? And you can probably take it that as judges, they'll probably come in open-minded, but maybe a little bit skeptical. You know, that fine, it's on paper, prove it. Your job as a communicator and your job next week, and in fact, your job going forward when you're planning any communication is this. What do I want my audience thinking, feeling, doing, knowing, saying afterwards? So what do I want the judges thinking, doing? I want them thinking, gosh, this person is well prepared. I want them feeling that, okay, that they've really put the work in. What do I want them doing? Talking to other judges about how good the story was, how good the example was, and saying all that as well. So for any communication, and this will happen a lot, that people would sometimes come into us and be concerned or worried about certain things. And we would take the view that at the end of the day, you have to focus exclusively on your audience, whether it's the judges next week, whether it's whatever audience you're dealing with. Your job is to make sure I have to take my own thoughts and views out of this and focus exclusively on my audience. And I want you to think about this as you go through the next little while. Are you planning your communication because you have something you want to say? Or are you planning communication because you actually want to influence the judges or whoever your audience is at the very end? Okay, so we're going to return to this a little later on, but that's really important. So who do you want to influence and persuade? Now, we have a couple of videos here that we want to show you. And I suppose the key thing I would try and get you to think about is, I want you to look at we're not going to watch every second of every video, but I want you to think about, if you're giving feedback, and whether it's on chat or whatever, what do you like? What do you not like? So if you like something, why do you like it? If you don't like something, what would you propose to do to fix it? Okay. So I'm just going to put this video up. This is a short TED talk, and it's essentially, what are the secrets of success? It's delivered a number of years ago, but I want you to look at this and see, how do you think this presenter and communicator comes across? What do you think of them? What's your view? What do you remember? What worked? What didn't work? Okay, so I'm going to play this. Queevy, you might give me just a little yes or no. If you can just let me know if you can hear this. Just let me know on the chat here as well. So away we go here now. Sorry, here now. Here, perfect. Okay, great. So we'll continue on here now. Sorry, now with this. Okay, now where we go. Okay.
This is really a 2-hour presentation I give to high school students, cut down to 3 minutes. And it all started one day on a plane on my way to TED 7 years ago. And in the seat next to me was a high school student, a teenager, and she came from a really poor family. And she wanted to make something of her life. And she asked me a simple little question. She said, "What leads to success?" And I felt really badly because I couldn't give her a good answer. So I get off the plane and I come to TED. And I think, geez, I'm in the middle of a room of successful people. So why don't I ask them what helped them succeed and pass it on to kids? So here we are, 7 years, 500 interviews later, and I'm going to tell you what really leads to success and makes TEDsters tick. And the first thing is passion. Freeman Thomas says, "I'm driven by my passion." TEDsters do it for love, they don't do it for money. Carol Coletta says, "I would pay someone to do what I do." And the interesting thing is, if you do it for love, the money comes anyway. Work. Rupert Murdoch said to me, "It's all hard work. Nothing comes easily, but I have a lot of fun." Did he say fun, Rupert? Yes. TEDsters do have fun working, and they work hard. I figured they're not workaholics, they're workaholics. Good. Alex Garden says, to be successful, put your nose down in something and get damn good at it. There's no magic, it's practice, practice, practice. And it's focus. Norman Jewison said to me, "I think it all has to do with focusing yourself on one thing." And push. David Gallo says, push yourself. Physically, mentally, you've got to push, push, push. You got to push through shyness and self-doubt. Goldie Hawn says,
No. Sorry, no. No.
I always had self-doubts. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't smart enough. I didn't think I'd make it. Now, it's not always easy to push yourself, and that's why they invented mothers. Frank Gehry said to me, "My mother pushed me." Serve. Sherwin Newland says it was a privilege to serve as a doctor. Now, a lot of kids tell me they want to be millionaires, and the first thing I say to them is, okay, well, you can't serve yourself. You got to serve others something of value, because that's the way people really get rich. Ideas. TEDster Bill Gates says, "I had an idea." Founding the first microcomputer software company. I'd say it was a pretty good idea. And there's no magic to creativity and coming up with ideas. It's just doing some very simple things. And I give lots of evidence. Persist. Joe Kraus says persistence is the #1 reason for our success. You got to persist through failure. You got to persist through crap, which of course means criticism, rejection, assholes, and pressure. So the answer to this question is simple. Pay $4,000 and come to TED. Or failing that, do the 8 things, and trust me, these are the big 8 things that lead to success. Thank you, TEDsters, for all your interviews.
Okay. Now, any initial observations on that? Do you think that was a good piece of communication? Was it effective? What worked? What didn't work? Anyone want to throw a question or a point up? I have a couple of things I'll raise myself, but if anyone has anything in particular they want to look at, happy to do that.
Just to mention there again, if you do have any comments, you can pop them into the chat feature or the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screens.
Okay. If I could just maybe quickly get a show of hands, would everyone remember the 8 secrets of success at the end of that presentation? If you were asked to tell a colleague afterwards, I saw this TED talk, I saw this presentation, what would you remember? Well, one of the things just to consider is that it's very easy to get over, and in fact, Shauna here has got to get ahead of me. Funny with Barda with too many slides. There's an awful lot of data there. And if you look at what we looked at earlier, if you can get an audience to remember one big general idea and have some evidence to back it up, you're doing a pretty good job. So whenever we hear people talk about, I need people to remember 3 or 4 things at the end of this, you get people to remember 1 or 2 big ideas. backed up with stories and evidence, you're doing a pretty good job. So don't ever set the bar so high that you go, well, look, I need people to remember 6 or 7 things. Like, we worked with a client a number of years ago who told us that, well, we need you to train our people to go out and present and remind business groups of the 11 grounds of discrimination. And they need to remember the 11 grounds at the very end. And we said, that's not possible to do. People won't remember 11 things at the end. And they were quite adamant about it. We said, well, can you name the 11 grounds of discrimination? And they couldn't. So the fact that they've been working on it for so long, they realized, well, actually, even though we know it intimately, we won't remember it off the top of our head. So how can you expect someone to remember it after half an hour? So I think it's a test as a good memory on that one. So well done on that. So the first thing I'd say to you is that we need to kind of think about what's the key message here. What is it people need to remember? What do we think they know, and what do we want them to know afterwards? Maybe they know something at the beginning. Maybe they know nothing. Maybe they're hostile. Maybe they're positive. But the point is, you need to work out roughly where they are and where you need them afterwards. He did also make the point as well at the beginning, this is a 2-hour presentation condensed down to 3 minutes. And I think it showed there was quite a lot of stuff been shown there. He also, one of your tests as mentioned there, he was very used humor and linked it to real people. Now, the humor is, it's a thing that we need to consider. And the only point I make is, I thought he was quite funny, and he made a couple of comments there about, mothers pushing people and things like that. Just remember, humor is quite subjective. How many of us have been at a wedding where best man has stood up or best woman has stood up, and they clearly think they're hilarious? There's a certain bunch of people who are very close to the happy couple who think they're funny. The rest of us are kind of left out or thinking that's not really appropriate or whatever. So the only thing I would just say to you around humor is that make sure humor is one man or woman's joke is another man or woman's insult. The best kind of humor is self-deprecating. Tell a joke against yourself. That's a good, that kind of is a good way to look at that as well. What he did try to do here in fairness to him was he did back up evidence. If he made a point, for example, he said it's about focus. He said, let me give you an example of a guy, a filmmaker or whomever, said it's about focus as well. So he had it backed up with a little bit of evidence or a little bit of data. I think, though, that he tried to cram too much into a short period of time. He could have maybe worked 3 or 4 examples at most and given us a bit more detail on them and moved that along as well. So just, there are a couple of things there that even with really effective slides, even with, a very slick delivery, if you're trying to get people to remember too much, and remember that the engagement with the judges will be time limited. So what are the key things you need to remember? Start with, what do they know? What do they have in front of them? What evidence do I need to back it up? And what do I want them thinking, doing, and saying at the end? Okay. So a couple of key things there to remember on that. Okay. So if we can think about who's our audience, what do we want them to remember afterwards? What are the things we're trying to get people to remember? Don't overload your audience, but also make sure you've got evidence and data to do it as well. Okay. Now, so we looked at what worked, or look at what didn't work. Now, does anyone else have any comments on that before we move on? Anything that struck you that you wanted to question or share or whatever? And if not, we can move on. We'll have a chance to come back at all this again. Okay, we'll keep an eye on the chat board anyway. Okay. Second video I want you to watch. I'm going to just watch the first 2 minutes of this. This is you will remember, obviously, you're familiar with Uber, and they tried to kind of come into the Irish market there a couple of years ago and didn't quite, for different reasons, didn't quite work out as smoothly initially, I think, as they'd hoped. But I just want you to listen to this video now. This is now an online presentation. You won't be able to see the speaker. Give me a sense of, okay, what do you think about the way this is set up, the way this is described, how this is coming across? So let's just have a listen to this. I say we're going to listen to one or maybe two or three minutes of this, okay? And again, just let me know if you can hear this.
So the most important reason why customers love Uber has its source in the design of the app and the service. As you'll see later, design innovation fits into the value proposition block. When you need a ride, you just pull out your mobile phone and tap a button to order a car. The phone's GPS knows exactly where you are, the driver knows where you're going because you enter the address on your phone as well, and the app has your credit card number, so there is no financial transaction between you and the driver. Now just imagine all the steps that have been deleted compared to the traditional taxi industry. Before, you needed to find a taxi company phone number. That already was a huge obstacle. Then you would need to talk to an operator and tell them your address. Then they would send you a taxi to pick you up, but you couldn't know exactly when it was coming. And finally, you would need to take out a payment method and use it manually at the end of the ride. So Uber literally combined all these numerous steps into a few button taps on a well-designed mobile app. So here design innovation is key, but not so much the visual design as we will explain later, but mainly the service design. The easier and more convenient customer journey through the service from the order until you're delivered to your destination. That's already a rule to remember for any business. Reduce the steps that your customer has to go through to enjoy your service as much as possible. Think about their actions from the moment they want to buy something from you and the moment they finally get it. How can you make it easier and faster for them? And for Uber, this innovation also extends to the channels, obviously. The channels block is about sales and delivery channels, and so here Uber app is definitely an innovation. The sale happens through a mobile app and not through a website booking or a phone call to a taxi company. But of course, for Uber, this doesn't stop here. Next innovation which makes Uber so successful in financial terms is a legal one.
Okay. Now, how are we in there, I think? Okay. Now, any comments on that so far, guys? How do you think Uber are telling their own story? How do you think they're coming across? They're looking at the value proposition, the design, and the channels. How do you think that's coming across? Or maybe put the question another way. What would you remember from that minute and a half, 2 minutes, if you had to describe what is so great about Uber? Okay, we have that. Now, Shauna said it's too technical. Okay. And I would be inclined to agree with you because it started to use the language of the technology for, started with value proposition. And then it went to design and challenge. Now, they did try and, well, let me give you an example of what we mean by that. And this is something you need to watch in your business. I mean, I was just looking at the list of people who were attending today, and I've noticed a few others. I don't know exactly what you do, but looking at the list and the businesses, we all have things that, we would do, and we have a language and we have a process that we describe. And as the person doing it 40 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks of the year, you're going to start to develop your own language and terms. And you're also going to become very familiar with the process. The problem is your audience will rarely care about the process and maybe actually be put off by some of the language. So I remember listening to an advert a couple of years ago, who was talking about a mobile phone provider being mission critical. Now, the guy made jelly beans. So I don't know why the phrase mission critical is a phrase that we've seen come into the lexicon of business language the last couple of years. And all I'm just asking you to think about is that are there words and phrases you're using that are common in business, like value proposition, channel, but will they actually be understood by the audience you're dealing with? Now, for judges, I think they will understand it. They're the language of the business, the language of the what you do and how you do it. But be careful of two things. When you're telling your story, watch out if you start to develop what we call the curse of the expert. In other words, that because you know something very specific, you're comfortable starting there. What you need to do is that if you are a financial expert, you have to take a step back and go, actually, what will influence my audience most here? I can talk about the value of the financial thing I do and how it's done and the elegance of the process and how it's all brilliant. But at the end of the day, am I starting in the place I want to start in, or where do I start telling my story in a way that will engage my audience? And indeed, how do I engage my audience? So one of the things to look out for is, am I starting somewhere that I'm comfortable with? Because that's where I'm happy to go. That's one of the symptoms of the curse of the expert. The second symptom is you're obsessed with the process and the language of the process rather than the outcome. And like, I would give you an example. I mean, my own training and my own background, and indeed, when I was working in Limerick, I worked for many years as a lawyer. I'm a solicitor. Now, lawyers and solicitors and accountants and engineers, we love the process. Someone comes into my office as a solicitor and says, am I forgetting this summons? Am I going to prison? I'm not going to tell them yes or no because I don't know. I'm going to walk them through a process to explain and go through it in detail. And also I'm charging by the hour. But the point is, for a communication, when you're trying to influence and persuade people, they won't buy into the process until you make it relevant to them. So if we look at the previous communication, Richard St. John, he talked about, I'm going to tell you what are the secrets of success. This Uber presentation started by talking about the value proposition and where it fitted into the model. So very early on, it was very technical. Now, if this was to a technical audience, that's fine. But if it was to a more general audience, I would agree with you. I think some of the language is not appropriate. I think some of the phrasing, they use examples to try and explain what they're trying to do, but they only tag it on at the very end. Okay, so think about being the curse of the expert. You will know more about your business than anyone else, but what's the piece that the judges need to remember next week, and how do we build that in? Okay, so I just want to move on here. Like, what do we remember? What worked? What didn't work? A lot of technical language. I think when they explained, well, look, it's actually taking the steps out, making it easier, and we summarize the key points. That definitely worked. What didn't work was where they started. You know, started talking about a lot of technical terms for, say, a general audience. It might work for a specific audience, but actually, how are the reasons that people pay attention? What are the reasons that people listen to you? Well, let's look at, there's a couple of main areas that you're going to be assessed on with the judges, depending on what competition you're in. So how do you tell a good story? Well, the first thing is you put your customer or your client at the heart of everything you say. So you're describing it from the customer's point of view, or the client's point of view, or the audience's point of view. So what is your unique selling point to your specific audience? And think of the judges in particular. So for example, if you know one of your judges is financially minded, right? What is the financial benefit that you can offer to your customers? What can you better more efficiently? Start there. So if you look at innovation and adaptability, don't fall in love with the technology so much that you forget to tell us, what does it mean for your audience? What does it mean for your customer? So, you know, to give you an example, I worked with a chap a number of years ago who was a metallurgist, and he created a new alloy that was going to go into a type of valve that was going to go onto massive oil rigs and oil fields in various parts of the world. And he described in great detail how the alloy was created, the molecular structure and all that. But when we quizzed him at the end, he said, well, why does it matter? He says, oh, you don't have to replace this valve for 20 years. Currently, you have to replace them every 4 years. I said, well, what's significant about that? He says, well, that saves on average about $5 million a year to every oil refinery in the world. So I said, well, that's where you need to start. You know, what this will save money, and you can tell about the process later on. So an innovation and an adaptable feature is only innovative and interesting and adaptable if you can make it understandable to the audience. And one of the ways you do that is, can you describe your product or service as removing a threat or offering a benefit? And it's a very simple way to get an audience's attention or a judge's attention very early on. The growth and development sector. How did you maintain that uniqueness? What is the story behind the need for your product or service, or the story behind your recent change? So, for example, all of you are probably going to get a question about COVID. How did you handle the pandemic? What changes did you make? So have an example, have a story to back that up. Have something that, well, here's what we did. So on Thursday, the 13th of, or the 12th of March, 2020, when the Taoiseach came and said, listen, we're shutting up shop, lads, we were sitting around the plant or the factory, and this is what we did. And this is why we did it, or here was the problem. So bring it down to a story. Think about the change you brought in. How did you bring it in? How did it matter? Now, customer satisfaction is another big area. We need a really good story. Have a story ready of, did something threaten your customer's view of your business or product, and what you do to protect it? So how did you mind your brand? How did you mind your story? Your business. I did a lot of work with one of the banks there recently, and they talked about when they're dealing with businesses and business owners. I think it was a very good point, and I'm not going to take credit for it. They said that most business owners think of their business like a member of their family. So how do you protect the reputation of your family? How do you protect the reputation of your business? What are the things you did to keep your customers happy? Did you literally go the extra mile? Did you stay open longer? Did you do something that maybe didn't make you money, but developed goodwill and kept your brand? What are the things you've done and done well? So so think about the best day you had in the office, the nicest phone call you got, the letter, the email where the customer was going, fair dues to you. Are you ready to tell that story? The last thing is, what drives you to do good? What was the contribution to the region? So is there something you've done? You know, and this is the thing that a lot of Irish businesses and Irish people have a problem with. They don't like to boast or, you know, I did this or I did that, but I think you need to. Is there something you've done? Have you contributed to employment in the area? Do you mentor people? Do you support the region? Do you support a charity? Do you support a business? You know, what are the things you've done or do really well that actually people will remember, that not necessarily done to make a buck, but maybe it's done because it's the right reason. And it can be time you put in, it can be being attentive to something, but have that story ready to go, guys. The pity would be that you walk out of this process and you're hang up the phone or turn off the video or whatever and go, I should have said that. So part of the preparation the next couple of days is thinking and planning. What are my stories? What's my examples? What's my evidence? Okay. Any questions? Just leave that up there for a second, guys. Any questions on any of that so far? Anything not making sense? But if you look at those criteria in terms of adaptability, growth and developments, customer satisfaction, contribution to the region, they all need a story. But you have to start with where your customer is, not where you want to go as well, okay? Now, you have one question here. So, Lavinia, thanks for that, Lavinia, okay. So, let's look at, we're going to go on here now. Okay, grant. Okay, now, thank you very much, guys. Now, let's go on to structuring all this, okay? Great ideas. Where's my audience? Where's my judge now? Where do I want them afterwards? Let's see how we structure it. So, we have chat here as well. Okay, thank you very much. Now, so let's look at the next one here now. This is what we call the iron rule of communications. And this is what it goes back to the threat and the benefit. This is how people pay attention, and who you pay attention, how I pay attention. And it's something to remember, how do you get people's attention? The first thing people respond to is a threat or the removal of a threat. There's a problem here, but we have a solution. Think about weather. I'm old enough to remember when I was growing up, there was a weather forecast. Now, because weather has become so politicized, it has become, I suppose, so extreme, the weather that is, that now we have things like amber warnings, red warnings, yellow warnings, orange warnings, rainfall warnings, wind warnings. But it's the only way to kind of get people's attention. And the reason I'm saying this is that one of the ways you get an audience's attention at the start of any communication is highlight there's a problem, we have a solution. The second way you do it is something I do is a benefit. And the third reason you get an audience attention is because what I'm about to say or show them is of interest. Now, can we just scrap interest for a minute? What is the issue? If you look at your business or product or service, you're doing one of two things here. You're either identifying and solving a problem or you're offering a benefit. You have to decide where does your business fit in there. So for example, if you are working in a charity, what is the benefit to the region of the work you do? Can you be specific on that? If you are providing some sort of an emergency service or providing advice to keep businesses or companies out of trouble or to keep within a regulatory framework, you're probably in the business of threat or removal of a threat. But the reality is, if you can boil down your business and your proposition to that idea, that's how you start by focusing on the customer. You're not like the worst presentations are the ones that start with, well, as everyone knows, the communications clinic started in 2008. It came from the senior management team out of another communication. Nobody gives a hoot. So what is it that communications clinic does? What we actually do is we make people be the best versions of themselves when they're publicly communicating. And let me show you how we do it. You all have a version of that. We're solving a problem or we're offering a benefit. And I'd like you to think about that next couple of days over the weekend. Have I got that at the tip of my tongue, not only for the judges, but when I'm going about my business, when I'm doing my pitch, talking to people, engaging with people as well. Okay. Nothing wrong with being interesting. But in the line of work that you're doing, people will invariably be drawn to you because what you do solves a problem that they have or offers them a benefit. Okay. One of the things we're often asked when, do you tell the story or you get to the point? How do you do things? And it really depends on the time and context that you've been questioned and asked in. If you have a short time to pitch, make your key point, and if you have time, tell the story around it. If you have longer time with the audience, tell the story in a way, in a manner that is appropriate to your audience's needs. What I mean by that is, how long do you have? Don't do the thing as, well, I have 5 minutes, I better give them a 5-minute story. You're better off to give a well-told story over 2 minutes and leave time for Q&A rather than, that old, the law that says the amount of time you have will naturally be taken up by whatever amount of work you're doing. So think about your audience. So you think about your judges and look at them again. How long do you have with them? How busy are they? How many of them are you meeting? Well, you think about it from their point of view. How many other people do they have to meet? So even if you make a reference to that, you can decide, well, look, maybe I just need to make my point and I can briefly allude to the story. What is it we do? Here's the key thing you need to remember about our business. Here's the key thing you need to remember about our innovation. Here's our example. Here's the key thing about customer satisfaction. Here's the key thing about our contribution to the region, or whatever it is. Have that practiced and prepared. There are two ways when we talk about storytelling you can tell a story. And it goes back to the point of how long do you have. The first way is the journey. From beginning to end, make sure the conclusion is appropriate to the needs of the audience. Now, the journey is fraught with a lot of potential problems. How much time do you have? Are you telling the journey from your point of view? Are you putting in stuff that you don't actually need? Or are you focusing on your audience? The second way is what they call in medias res, which means that you drop the audience in a situation straight away, right in the middle. There I was, stuck in the airport with no cash and I had no idea what to do. So I had a problem. Let me tell you how I solved it and how I developed the business idea or whatever it is. You don't give it all away at the start. You kind of keep people's attention. So a lot of businesses I've worked in a lot of work with, for example, the Small Firm Association. A lot of people who set up businesses set them up because they saw a problem that they were having or other people were having, and they came up with a solution. One of my favorite stories is a company that are involved in running the whole entire cleanup of big events. And they're an Irish-based company, and they work and clean up after big events. One of the events they worked on, and I hope they'll be working on next year, is Glastonbury. And they start their pitch by saying, how do you make sure you put 100 cows out in a field after you two have finished playing and there's been 30,000 tents and all sorts of rubbish in that field? How do you make sure that happens safely? Let me tell you how we do it. So they start in so it's a very engaging way to tell a story. They don't give it away at the start, but they talk about it as well. But the key things that both these examples need are evidence. You need to have, don't make assertions. If you're going to tell a story, what's your evidence? What's your data? Structure of a good story, an introduction. What's the problem been solved, or what's the benefit been offered? I just was split into 3 areas here, area 1, area 2, area 3, and a conclusion. And a conclusion, again, should very similarly wrap up your introduction. Now, you could have 4 areas depending on the criteria you're being assessed on, but how you set up your areas is based on, have I got an example and have I got an evidence to back it up? So if you're going to make a claim in an area, you must have an example and or evidence to back up what you're saying. So if you're looking at, you're saying that your service is more efficient, or you're able to bring in you're able to be adaptable. Just bringing in a computerized system doesn't make you adaptable. What's your evidence? Well, we cut our lead times by 40%. Our response to customers was up 30%, whatever it is. Have the specific, tell the story to the end. What's the evidence that what you have works? Maybe you don't have evidence, but can you talk about milestones that the company have hit or whatever? That's really important. Woven throughout it should be what your key theme is. So we're offering a benefit, we're solving a problem. Whatever your theme is initially, that should be woven through the communication as well. But that's a very good, because sometimes people don't know how to start or end a presentation or run it. And I would say if you're having to, say, for example, 4 key areas that you've been assessed on, you know you've finished it because you've given the evidence and example, then you move on to the next area, evidence and example. Process for preparing any communication is, who's my audience? Let's just focus on the judges for a minute. Knowledgeable, experienced, specialist in different areas. What's my objective? Objective is I want to impress the hell out of them. What must they remember? Well prepared, good evidence, structured. How will they remember it? I could tell a good story. I got my evidence. I've got my examples. But here's the thing you must do as well. Make a list of the obvious questions you expect to be asked, and then you make a list of the questions you hope to God you won't be asked, and do that in advance. Because, you know, if you get a question that you're well prepared for, great. But if you're avoiding a question because you're worried about, oh God, I don't know the answer to that, go ahead and do the research now. And if you don't trust yourself to ask a hard question, find a colleague or a friend who will. You know, that honest friend who'll go, listen, I think that's a pile of Horlicks what you're saying. I don't believe you. Or I don't think that what your point is strong as it needs to be. Or I don't think you've got right evidence for that. And work on that over the next couple of days to have the answer ready to go. And by the way, if you don't know an answer, you've got 2 options. First option is say, look, I don't know the answer. I'll look that up for you and I'll try and get back to you. Second option is go ahead and prove you don't know the answer by trying to spoof it. And believe me, and you've seen the list of judges, you won't spoof these people. So those 2 last boxes are important. What are the obvious questions? So think about questions where you want to prove your turnover, your projections, your efficiencies, the impact you've had in the region, dealing with customers, all that success. Have you got stories to back it up? What are questions you hope you won't be asked? So, for example, how have you dealt with now people going back to the office? How is that working out for you? Has your market, have you relied too much on the UK market? How is that going to change with Brexit? Will the 15% tax announcement will have an impact on you? Think about the nasty question you could be asked and be ready to have an answer for them. Okay? Last thing I just wanted to talk to you about was to remind you again, the threat, move of the threat, or the benefit. And interest is nice, but really these are the 2 that matter. There's a couple of things on the pitches with the one you're doing next week. For a competition, key thing is it's a specific introduction of you, your former product to a panel of judges. You have to establish credibility. Evidence is key. And be ready for skepticism. How do you handle it? So how do you handle someone going, I don't buy that, I don't believe that? And what you need to do is you need to develop an objective, factual response, rather than, as we say in Offaly, where I'm from, getting thick. People are going to question, I don't believe you. Are you sure about that? Let me give you the evidence. That's all you can do. But be ready for that. The other type of pitches you might be involved in going forward, the elevator pitch, we've all heard about them, and it's a very short pitch, but really the objective is, what do you want your audience doing at the end? Well, what you want your audience doing at the end is setting up a meeting. Elevator pitch isn't going to tell your life story or tell your hopes and dreams, but it's going to get enough information to say, listen, get me in at the door and let's see what we can do and how do we manage that as well. Okay? And then, how long do you have to make an impression? Reality is 30 to 45 seconds. And that's because we're all getting bombarded with information. So you don't have time to go into the corporate history of your business or the recent takeover, or, you need to get to listen, this is what we do. This is why it's important. We'd love to meet you more about this, and give them a sense of where this potentially could go rather than where it's been. Okay. The last one then is the tender pitch. And this is one that we get a lot of people come to us about. They've done all the hard work. Now they have to pitch as a group. And you must be consistent with your tender submission. Because if there's inconsistencies to what you wrote and what you said, you're in trouble. Evidence of teamwork and expertise is key. So have you got a good team? Have you got the right people in? And I suppose the one bit of advice we'll give you is that just because you're the managing director, just because you're the senior person, doesn't always mean you're the right person to be there. Some of the best CEOs we've worked with have a little team. And I mean a little team. They don't have an entourage, but they have enough people that can come in and go, these are the experts. These are people who need to know this stuff as well. And be prepared to listen carefully. So listen to the questions, check, clarify what it is they're asking before you go ahead and answer it. So don't jump in other words. Don't be afraid to check the question before you move on. Close an image, again, it's all obvious, but I would just, a couple of things you need to remember. Dress you want to be perceived, how you dress and groom to your advantage. 2 P's and a P. Now, I'm not sure how much this applies now with me today, but if I was wearing a tie, you can imagine for a man, for example, there's 3 pieces of clothing. There's a shirt, a tie, and a suit. The 2 P's and a P refer to plain and pattern. So you should have 1 plain and 2 pattern, or 2 pattern and 1 plain. So for example, I have a plain suit. I have a pattern tie, a pattern shirt. So it's 1 of each. So I can have a plain tie or a pattern tie. But if I had a pinstripe suit, check shirt, and a tie with dots on it, it would all be 3 of 1. So it'd all look a little bit mad. So, but as my wife always says, the most important words are clean and ironed. Really important. And for men and women, don't wear anything louder than you. So for example, big watches, flashy cufflinks, anything that's distracting. The background you're working in, make sure it's not distracting, nothing irrelevant in it. You'd be surprised what I've seen. I'm sure you've seen as well, people having their bedrooms or kitchens or whatever. Are you well lit? Do you have a good microphone and camera? Can you control the lighting for various times of day or night? So we've little small windows here. It doesn't really matter whether it's bright or not. The light is always the same here. Is your pitching space noise free, or do you have something distracting? Careful of that. Can you see your notes if necessary? My recommendation is, if you have notes, keep them in front of you, between you and the camera, in your gaze path, rather than off over to one side where it's obvious. And then the screen will be your shop window, and the first impression a client or a judge will see. So really, is that set up? Do you have your brand, for example, if you got one of those pop-ups or whatever, make sure you're doing all that right. The last thing I want to talk about really quickly, and this is for really your future use, visual aids, slide decks. Now, slide decks are important, but slide decks are good, for example, in relation to graphics. If you look at the second one there, global growth is better expressed with a chart rather than words. Now, I do want to kind of give you a quick tip. One of the best ways to introduce a slide, if you can't really control what's on the slide, is to tee it up, put it up, and shut up. So I'm going to do this now. I'm going to tee up this slide. I'm going to put it up and then I'm going to say nothing because I want you to read it. But this slide is based on, in 2003, NASA launched the oldest space shuttle, the Columbia. And after they launched it, they reviewed the launch and they realized that some of the foam had fallen off part of the engine housing and it struck the shuttle about 14 miles up in the atmosphere. Now, it struck the wing. Now, got up fine, it's orbiting, but there's an issue because, well, is it safe to bring it back down? Because it's a lot of heat, a lot of stress on the airframe. So Boeing, who built the shuttle, were asked to do a series of tests to determine, well, can we bring it in? I'm going to show you the slide that Boeing presented to NASA. And I want you to tell me, if you want to click on it, in the chat, what do you think is the most important piece of information on this slide? So I'm going to show you this slide. It is rocket science, I do apologize, but what do you think is the most important line on this slide? And if you want to put it up in the chat or in the Q&A, that's absolutely fine. What do you think? Anyone hazard a guess in the chat or the Q&A? What's the most important key piece of information on that slide? Okay, so a couple of questions here. The last line, volume of ramp, and then okay. Now, no, you're wrong, and it's not. And I know it's highlighted there. It's the line above it. Flight conditions significantly outside the test database, which means in English, we don't know. Not a clue. Not a buzz notion. You might say, well, it's a strange place to put that key point. And that's what I made the point, that should be put at the top. What they've done is they've gone through the process. We did this, then we did this, then we did this, but we don't actually know. And they've also used the word significantly a number of times, or variants of it. So how can 4 or 5 things on a slide be significant just because you say they're significant? The point is this. People reading this slide, and this goes back to my first point, who's your audience? We're not engineers. They were managers. They weren't even that technical. They didn't understand the slide. They ignored it, brought the shuttle home, and as you all probably know, it disintegrated somewhere over Texas and 7 astronauts were killed. In fact, this slide made a very interesting appearance in a congressional hearing. A guy called Edward Tufte, who was a emeritus professor of communications. This is the point he made about this slide afterwards. So this is what they said about this. I'll just let you read that. Okay, so it's all about the communication. Communication wasn't structured, it wasn't clear, they didn't think about their audience, and they buried the key point at the end of the slide. And that's what led to the confusion. Okay. Now, last thing to remember, be authentic. Don't be a version of yourself, be yourself. And you become that by practicing out loud. Pace your points to your audience and separate them with examples and evidence. Use language appropriate to your audience. Watch your humor carefully. It should be self-deprecating if possible, but you don't have to be funny. You have to be engaging. You have to be memorable. If you gesture, just because you're speaking in public, if you use your hands, that's what you need to do. Be mindful of how you appear in person and on screen. Listen and watch the audience. Listen to the questions the judges ask. That's the process there. Who's our audience? What's our objective? What must we remember? How will they remember it? Stories, examples, evidence. Say it out loud. What are the obvious questions? What are the questions I hope to God I won't be asked? think about those in advance. Guys, that's it. There are my details there, barry@communicationsclinic.ie, and that's my Twitter handle as well. If any of you have any questions as well, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm conscious we're just up on the time, but thank you very much, guys. And if there's anything, anything else we can help you out with, don't hesitate to contact us. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Barry. That was absolutely fantastic. And like that, we'll share Barry's details in the comms after this event, as well as the recording as mentioned earlier. Barry, you're getting an acclaim there in the chat feature.
Thank you.
You've given us certainly something to think about. And like that, as Barry mentioned, there is a new opportunity now to record videos with your applications for the Limerick Chamber Regional Business Awards. You can record videos, and like that, you can redraft it as many times as you want if you want to keep Barry's notes in front of you as well. So like that, I'll include links to the applications for the awards if you're interested. I'll include the recording, and like that, we'll include Barry's details. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Barry. That was a fantastic presentation, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend.
That's it. And the best luck with everything, guys, and good luck in your videos, and good luck in meeting the judges, and good luck with everything. Thank you very much. And thanks, Kiva, for organising everything so well. Okay.
Not a trouble. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you everyone for joining us.